In the stillness of an alien world, under a sky stretched thin with grief, I stood face to face with the woman I had abandoned, an ethereal being whose presence defied the very laws of space and time. Her luminous eyes held the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions, and as she crossed galaxies to find me, I realized I wasn't running from her, I was running from the truth. The scene begins under a sky that seemed infinite, its muted grays stretching far beyond the horizon, creating an atmosphere of solemnity and endlessness. The landscape itself feels like a mirror to the weight of the emotions about to unfold. It is against this backdrop that the alien woman appears, standing still and silent, her presence both haunting and otherworldly. Her gaze is piercing, her eyes holding a profound sorrow that seems to bypass all barriers and speak directly to the narrator's soul. This sorrow isn't loud or overt. It is quiet yet overwhelming, carrying the weight of unspoken emotions and unresolved history. Her form is a blend of the familiar and the alien, a delicate balance that makes her appearance both unsettling and mesmerizing. She is almost human, yet small differences set her apart, a subtle reminder that she belongs to a world far beyond this one. Her silver hair flows unnaturally, as though it were alive, reflecting the light like liquid moonlight cascading down her shoulders. Her skin glows faintly, shimmering as if lit from within, a quiet radiance that hints at her otherworldly nature. These details give her an ethereal presence, making her seem both fragile and powerful at the same time. Her arrival carries a gravity that goes beyond her physical appearance. She doesn't speak in words, yet her emotions are palpable, resonating in the air like a melody felt rather than heard. The sheer intensity of her presence forces the narrator to confront something deeper, a connection that runs far beneath the surface of spoken language or shared experiences. She is not just a figure from his past. She is a living embodiment of regret, longing, and unfulfilled promises. The narrator cannot ignore her, for her very being demands acknowledgement. Her presence on Earth, a place she does not belong, immediately sets the stage for a profound and painful confrontation with the truths the narrator has tried so hard to bury. The alien woman's presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just her physical form, though that alone was striking. It was the way she seemed to exist on an entirely different plane, as if she carried an energy that the very air around her responded to. She did not speak in words. Instead, her voice came to me as waves of emotion, bypassing the need for language and touching something deeper within me. These emotions weren't vague or abstract. They were vivid, raw, and undeniable, filling the silence between us with a resonance that felt both intimate and overwhelming. Her unspoken voice carried a heavy sadness, but it wasn't a bitterness or anger. It was a sorrow that pierced through my defenses, like a mirror reflecting the truths I had avoided for so long. It was a sorrow that held a profound depth, an understanding of loss, betrayal, and perhaps even hope. Her ability to communicate in this way was both beautiful and unsettling. I wasn't just hearing her, I was feeling her, as though her emotions were flowing directly into my being, intertwining with my own and leaving me utterly exposed. The ache that her presence awakened in me was almost unbearable. It wasn't a simple sadness, but a complex tapestry of emotions. A deep, visceral reminder of the promises I had made and broken, of the love I had once known and left behind. This ache wasn't just about her. It was about me, about the parts of myself I had tried to forget. Her very existence forced me to confront the guilt that had shadowed me ever since I had left her world. Standing before her, I could no longer hide behind the walls I had built. Her presence dissolved them, leaving me vulnerable in a way I hadn't been for years. In that moment, she felt less like a physical being and more like a living embodiment of everything I had once held dear and everything I had lost. She wasn't there to accuse or to demand. She was simply there, her silent sorrow speaking louder than any words ever could. Her presence became a force that I could not escape, a reminder not only of what I had done, but also of what I had failed to become. The connection we shared, even now, was undeniable. It was as if she had brought the weight of the universe itself with her, pressing down on me until I could no longer deny the truth of who I was and what I had left behind. Her journey to find me was nothing short of extraordinary, an act of devotion that defied every limitation I thought existed. She had traversed galaxies, crossing vast stretches of cold, empty space where stars burned like distant sentinels, each one a reminder of how far she had come. The enormity of such a journey was staggering. Time, distance, and the barriers of different worlds had meant nothing to her in her quest. She had endured it all, driven by something far greater than mere determination. Her presence on this beach, so far from the world she called home, was a testament to a bond that even the universe itself could not break. As I looked at her, I was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her effort. This was not a casual reunion. It was a deliberate act, a mission that had likely consumed her entire being. She had crossed the endless expanse of the cosmos, not knowing if she would even find me. Yet here she stood. There was no anger in her stance, no bitterness. She hadn't come to confront me with rage or to demand answers with fury. Instead, her luminous eyes held a quiet resolve, a weight of purpose that I could barely comprehend. Her journey was not about retribution. It was about understanding, about uncovering the truth of why I had left and what that choice had meant. The vastness of her travel also mirrored the emotional chasm between us, a distance I had created by leaving her behind. Yet, despite the pain and betrayal I had inflicted, she had sought me out, undeterred by the passage of time or the cruelty of abandonment. It was as though she carried with her the very essence of her world, her presence resonating with the energy of a place I had once loved and then forsaken. Her arrival was not just a physical crossing of space. It was an act of breaking through the barriers I had erected to shield myself from my past. Standing before her now, I felt small, insignificant against the magnitude of what she had endured to find me. Her journey was not just a traversal of stars. It was a crossing of emotional boundaries, a shattering of the illusions I had clung to for so long. She stood there as a reminder of everything I had tried to escape, the guilt, the fear, the failures, and the realization of what her presence truly meant began to weigh on me. She had defied the vastness of the universe to reach me, and in doing so, she had brought with her the reckoning I had long sought to avoid. Her world had been like no other, a place of wonder and beauty that seemed alive in ways Earth could never match. It was vibrant, pulsating with energy that felt almost sentient, as though the very fabric of her planet responded to her presence. The skies shimmered with colors unknown to human eyes, and the air carried a rhythm that was both calming and invigorating. It was a world that seemed to exist in harmony with itself, a paradise that defied the harshness and chaos I had known on Earth. From the moment I arrived, I was drawn to its allure, intoxicated by its unfamiliarity and the sense of endless possibilities it offered. But it wasn't just her world that captivated me. It was her. She was unlike anyone I had ever encountered, her presence radiating a calm, yet powerful energy that seemed to draw everything around her into balance. She taught me things about the universe that I had never imagined, opening my mind to possibilities that expanded far beyond the limits of human comprehension. Her wisdom was deep, not born of books or study, but of an intrinsic connection to the cosmos itself. Through her, I began to see the universe as something alive, something far greater and more interconnected than I had ever believed. Our bond formed quickly, but it was profound, as though we had been destined to find one another despite the impossible distances that separated our worlds. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a connection that went beyond words or even thoughts. We shared stories, dreams, and emotions in ways that transcended language, building a relationship that felt eternal. It was as if we had become two halves of a whole, tied together by something that neither of us could fully explain. In her presence, I felt seen, understood, and loved in ways I had never known before. And yet, in my arrogance or perhaps my ignorance, I made her a promise, one that no human had the right to make. I promised her forever. I promised her that I would stay, that I would embrace her world as my own, and that I would never leave her side. At the time, it felt so natural, so effortless, as though the bond we shared would make anything possible. I believed in the moment, in the strength of what we had, without fully grasping the weight of the commitment I was making. But the enormity of that promise began to dawn on me over time. Her world was so vast, so different, and so overwhelming that it began to feel like I was losing myself within it. The connection that had once felt liberating started to feel like a tether, binding me to something I wasn't sure I could fully understand or sustain. Fear crept in, fear of the unknown, fear of the weight of our bond, fear of losing my identity in something so incomprehensibly vast. That fear drove me to a decision I now regret more than anything. I broke the promise. I left her behind without even saying goodbye, fleeing back to the familiarity of Earth in a desperate attempt to reclaim a sense of control. The connection we shared, once a source of wonder and strength, became a reminder of my deepest failure. I abandoned not only her, but also the beauty and potential of what we had built together. I betrayed her trust and walked away from a world that had given me so much. Now, as she stood before me again, the weight of that broken promise pressed down on me, a constant reminder of the love I had chosen to leave behind. As she stood silently before me, her eyes searching mine, I felt the crushing weight of her unspoken expectations. She had not come here for anger, nor had she come seeking revenge. Her presence wasn't loud or accusatory. It was quiet but devastating in its intensity. She demanded nothing from me in words, yet her very existence here, on a world she did not belong to, demanded something far greater: the truth. It was a truth I had spent years avoiding, hiding behind the life I had rebuilt on Earth. But now, confronted by her luminous gaze, there was no escaping it. The truth was a complex and painful thing, something I could hardly admit to myself, let alone to her. Why had I left? Why had I abandoned everything we had shared? Why had I broken a promise that, at the time, had felt so absolute? These questions lingered in the air between us, unspoken but undeniable, pressing against me like an invisible force. She didn't need to voice them. I could feel them in every movement, every shift in her expression. And as they bore down on me, I realized how hollow my excuses sounded, even in my own mind. I had tried to justify my actions to myself over the years. I told myself that the connection we shared had been too much, too overwhelming. I told myself that her world, as beautiful as it was, had been too alien, too far removed from the life I knew. I told myself that I had been protecting her by leaving, sparing her from the inevitable pain of a bond that crossed the boundaries of species and worlds. But as I stood there before her, all those justifications crumbled under the weight of her presence. They were nothing more than feeble attempts to avoid acknowledging my own cowardice. Her eyes, filled with sorrow but devoid of anger, seemed to see through every lie I had ever told myself. She didn't need me to explain or to justify. She needed me to confront what I had done, to face the reality of my choices. The truth was that I had been afraid of the enormity of our bond, afraid of what it meant to love someone so different, and afraid of losing myself in something so vast and incomprehensible. I had run away because it was easier than staying, easier than facing the vulnerability and uncertainty that came with being with her. Her silence made it all the more unbearable. She didn't accuse or demand. She simply waited, giving me the space to come to terms with what I had done. But that silence was deafening, a void that I couldn't fill with excuses or justifications. It forced me to see myself as she saw me, not as the person I had tried to become on Earth, but as the flawed and fearful human who had broken a promise and left her behind. Her presence was a mirror, reflecting back everything I had tried to escape, and in that moment, I realized there was no hiding from her, or from myself, any longer. The weight of truth pressed down on me with unbearable force. It wasn't just the truth about why I had left. It was the truth about who I was. She had come all this way not to seek retribution, but to give me the chance to face myself. And in doing so, she had stripped away all the lies, all the defenses I had built, leaving me raw and exposed. The truth was that I had failed her, failed us, and no justification could ever change that. Her presence demanded that I acknowledge it, and as much as it hurt, I knew I owed her, and myself, nothing less. As she stood before me, silent but commanding, the memories of our time together surged through my mind like an unstoppable tide. They came unbidden, vivid and piercing, forcing me to relive every moment of the bond we had once shared. Each memory was a fragment of a life I had tried so hard to bury, a life that now felt more real than the one I had constructed on Earth. Her presence acted as a key, unlocking the floodgates of my past, and I could do nothing to stop the deluge of recollections that overwhelmed me. I remembered the first time I saw her world, a place of breathtaking wonder and beauty. Its twin moons bathed the landscape in silvery light, and the air hummed with an energy that seemed alive, almost conscious. Her planet had a rhythm, a pulse, as though it were a living entity, and I had been captivated by it. But more than the world itself, I remembered the way she moved within it, as if she were an extension of its essence. She belonged to that world in a way that was almost divine, and I had been drawn to her like a moth to a flame. I remembered the sound of her laughter, a melody that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of her world. It wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a warmth that enveloped me and made me forget the vast distances that separated our two species. Her laughter had a way of making the universe feel smaller, more intimate, as though nothing existed outside of that moment. And her smile, it was radiant, a light that could dissolve the weight of any burden. In her presence, I felt invincible, as though together we could conquer anything, even the barriers of time and space. There were the nights we spent beneath her planet's twin moons, sharing stories of our worlds and dreams of what the future might hold. Those conversations were unlike anything I had ever experienced. She opened my mind to perspectives and possibilities that I had never imagined, and in turn, I shared with her the humanity that defined me, the struggles, the hopes, the flaws. Each word, each moment we spent together, wove an unbreakable bond between us, a connection that transcended the limitations of language and culture. It was a bond built on understanding, trust, and something deeper than either of us could put into words. And then there was the moment I made the decision to leave, a memory that now felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. I had tried to justify it at the time, telling myself that I was protecting her, that I was preserving something sacred by walking away before it was destroyed. But now, those justifications felt hollow. The truth was that I had been afraid of the enormity of what we shared, afraid of losing myself in her world, and afraid of the unknown future that stretched out before us. I had turned my back on her and her world, fleeing to the familiarity of Earth and leaving her behind without so much as a goodbye. Each memory was a reminder of what I had lost, the love, the connection, the wonder of her and her world. As they flooded my mind, I felt a deep ache, a longing to return to those moments and undo the choices I had made. But her presence now made it clear that those days were gone, and there was no going back. The memories, once a source of joy, now felt like a weight, pressing down on me with the full force of my guilt and regret. And yet, even in their pain, they were a gift, a reminder of the beauty I had once known and the cost of the fear that had driven me away. Standing before me, she was a vision of otherworldly grace, a figure who seemed to exist on the edge of reality, her form fragile and almost dreamlike. Everything about her defied the logic of the world I knew. Her silver hair cascaded like liquid light, shimmering faintly in the soft glow of Earth's sun, as though it carried its own celestial radiance. Her skin glowed faintly, not in an artificial way, but as if she were imbued with the essence of the stars themselves. She was nearly human, And yet there was an undeniable otherness to her that made her presence magnetic, almost overwhelming. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each step a testament to her ethereal nature. She seemed to glide more than walk, as if gravity barely held her. It wasn't just how she moved, it was the aura she exuded. The air around her felt different, charged with an energy I could neither name nor fully comprehend. It was as though she carried the essence of her world with her, a piece of the vibrant, pulsating beauty I had once experienced. Standing close to her, I felt a simultaneous sense of awe and unease, like being in the presence of something divine, something I was never meant to touch. Her voice, or rather her way of communicating, bypassed words entirely. It wasn't sound, but emotion, a direct transmission to my soul. I felt her sorrow and her longing, her curiosity and her quiet strength, without her uttering a single word. It was a form of connection that was both intimate and unsettling, leaving me exposed in a way I wasn't prepared for. Her emotions surrounded me, filled me, and there was no escaping them. They made it impossible to retreat behind the walls I had built around myself. Her presence alone tore them down. And yet, despite her strength, there was a fragility to her that I couldn't ignore. She seemed almost translucent, as if she were a ghost or a memory made flesh. I could sense the strain it had taken for her to come here, to cross the vast emptiness of space and time to find me. There was a tenuousness to her form, a sense that she might dissolve into nothingness if I reached out to touch her. She was caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither, an ethereal being standing on the shores of a planet that was never hers. This fragility made her all the more heartbreaking. She had not come here in anger or vengeance, but in a quiet and resolute quest for understanding. Her resilience was awe-inspiring, but her presence also felt fleeting, like a candle burning in a strong wind. I could see in her eyes that this was no easy journey for her. It was a testament to the strength of what we had once shared that she had risked so much, pushed through so many boundaries, to stand before me now. Yet, in her fragility, there was also an unspoken sadness, a realization that this meeting was not a reunion, but a reckoning. Her presence reminded me of everything I had lost, but also of everything I had taken from her. The shimmering light that radiated from her seemed dimmer now than I remembered, as though the weight of what I had done had diminished her somehow. And yet, she stood tall and unyielding, an image of quiet dignity and strength, even as her form seemed to flicker at the edges, like a fading dream. It was this fragility, paired with her strength, that made her presence so profound. She was both a reminder of the infinite possibilities we had once shared and a symbol of the cost of my betrayal. The alien woman had not come to me in anger, nor did she carry the weight of vengeance in her presence. Her arrival wasn't marked by hostility or resentment, but by a quiet and almost reverent need for understanding. This realization struck me like a blow, shaking the defenses I had built around myself over the years. Her purpose was not to punish me for my abandonment or to demand restitution for the promises I had broken. Instead, she stood before me as a being seeking answers, seeking closure, and perhaps seeking peace for both of us. Her gaze, luminous and unyielding, seemed to pierce straight through me, bypassing all my attempts to shield myself from the pain of our shared history. There was no accusation in her expression, no bitterness or malice. And yet, her silent presence was far more devastating than any words of anger or blame could have been. She did not need to berate me for leaving. The very fact that she had traveled so far, defying the boundaries of space and time, spoke volumes. It was a reminder of the depth of our connection and the magnitude of my failure to honor it. Her desire for understanding was palpable, carried in the unspoken language of emotions that seemed to radiate from her being. I felt her sorrow, her longing, and her confusion as though they were my own. She wanted to know why I had turned my back on her, why I had abandoned the bond that had once tied us together so deeply. But her search for answers was not rooted in selfishness or anger. It was an act of healing, a way to reconcile the wounds left by my departure. In her quest for understanding, she extended to me a kind of grace I did not deserve, offering me the chance to confront the truth I had spent years running from. It would have been easier if she had been angry, if she had come to me with accusations and demands. Anger is something humans know how to deal with. It creates distance, a barrier that can shield us from guilt and self-reflection. But her calm and sorrowful presence stripped away that shield, leaving me exposed to the full weight of my actions. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth, no matter how painful or flawed that truth might be. And it was this quiet strength, this unwavering resolve to understand, that made her presence so deeply unsettling and yet so profoundly moving. I began to see that her journey was as much for herself as it was for me. She wasn't just here to hear my explanation. She was here to find closure, to make sense of the choices I had made and the ripple effects they had created. She wanted to understand not only why I had left, but what that decision had meant for us, for her, and for the bond we had shared. In her pursuit of understanding, she wasn't seeking to reopen old wounds, but to heal them, to let go of the weight of the past so that she could move forward. Her lack of vengeance was a reflection of her character, a testament to the being she was, a being who valued connection and understanding over retribution. It made me feel even smaller, more unworthy of her. I had run from her, from the enormity of what we shared, and yet she had chosen to face it head-on. She had crossed galaxies not to condemn me, but to look me in the eye and ask the questions I had been too afraid to answer. Her purpose wasn't to dwell in the pain of the past, but to find clarity and, perhaps, to remind me of the profoundness of what we had lost. In her search for understanding, she offered me a gift I hadn't expected, the opportunity to confront myself. Her presence forced me to reckon with my own guilt and fears, to face the truth of who I was and what I had done. She did not come to me as a judge or an executioner. She came as a mirror, reflecting back all the things I had tried to forget. And in doing so, she gave me the chance to find something I hadn't even realized I needed, an understanding of myself and the choices that had led me to this moment. As the moment stretched on, I began to understand that this meeting, this reunion of sorts, was not a second chance or an opportunity to rebuild what had been lost. It was something far more painful, but ultimately more meaningful. It was closure. Her presence, though it filled me with a mixture of longing and regret, was not about rekindling the bond we had once shared. Instead, it was a quiet, inevitable reckoning, an acknowledgement that what we had was gone, and no amount of words or actions could undo the choices I had made. The realization hit me with the full force of its truth. She had not come here to stay, to reclaim me, or to try to restore our relationship. She had come here to say goodbye. Her journey had not been one of anger or desperation, but one of acceptance and finality. She had crossed the vast, unimaginable distance of the universe, not to force me to face my past, but to find peace with it, to understand why I had left, and to sever the tie that had once bound us so strongly. She came not to change the past, but to let go of it. As I watched her, I saw the subtle shift in her form, the way her presence, once so vibrant and solid, began to wane and flicker. It was as if the very fabric of her being was unraveling, slowly, imperceptibly. She was fading, becoming less tangible with every passing moment. Her once luminous figure grew more translucent, like a fading star in the distant reaches of space, slipping out of my grasp. It was an unsettling and heartbreaking sight. The woman who had once been so real, so vivid, was slipping away, and I knew with a deep, profound certainty that there was no way to stop it. It wasn't just her physical presence that was vanishing. It was the emotional connection that had once tied us together. The bond we had shared was slowly dissolving, and in its place was an aching emptiness, a void I had never truly acknowledged until now. She wasn't disappearing in anger or betrayal. She was letting go, accepting the truth that our time had passed, and our paths had diverged. In that fading light, I saw that she was not seeking vengeance or even reconciliation. She was seeking freedom, from the pain of abandonment, from the bond that had once connected us, and from the weight of the promises I had broken. Her fading presence made the truth clear. There was no going back. I had been running from my past, from the guilt and fear of what I had done, but now it was inescapable. She had come not to shame me, but to help me confront the truth. Her departure marked the end of the chapter we had once shared, and as she faded away, I felt the last remnants of that chapter slip from my grasp. The woman who had once meant everything to me, who had taught me so much about the universe, was now slipping into the past, her form disappearing like a dream that had no place in my reality anymore. The finality of it all was crushing. She was leaving, and with her departure, I realized that I could never undo what I had done. I had lost her irrevocably. The bond we had shared was not something that could be resurrected by mere words or regret. It had to be let go of, just as she was letting go of me. In her final moments, she gave me the opportunity to face the truth of my actions and the weight of my choices, but she also gave me something more, the space to grieve, to mourn what I had lost, and ultimately, to accept that some things cannot be fixed. As she faded, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, not just for her, but for the person I had been and the future I could have had with her. Her presence had reminded me of the wonder, the love, and the beauty that had once existed between us, but it had also shown me the inescapable reality of my choices. And as I stood there, watching her disappear into the fading light of the evening, I realized that in some way, her fading was an act of kindness. It was her way of allowing me to move forward, to accept the past for what it was, and to find the closure I so desperately needed. The bond was gone, but the memory of what we had, of the love and connection, would stay with me forever. When she was gone, the world around me seemed to shift in a way I couldn't quite explain. The wind that had once been gentle now felt colder, more isolating. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore, which had been a backdrop to our encounter, now echoed like a reminder of the solitude I was left with. The world seemed emptier, quieter, as though the very air itself had been stripped of something essential, leaving behind a hollow echo. I stood there, alone, on the same shore that had once been a place of promise, and I felt a deep emptiness within me that could never be filled. The alien woman's presence, so vivid and charged with meaning, had been a gift, a brief and fragile moment of connection. And now, without her, the space she had occupied felt unbearable. It wasn't just the absence of her physical form that weighed on me. It was the profound sense of loss that seemed to settle into every corner of my being. The guilt and regret that I had tried so hard to bury now rose to the surface, forcing me to face them head on. I had lost her not only in body but in spirit. The bond we had shared, the promises I had broken, the future we might have had. She had come to me seeking understanding, seeking closure. But in doing so, she had also opened up the floodgates of my own heartache. It was a heartache I hadn't allowed myself to feel fully, but now, with her departure, it consumed me. Standing alone on that beach, the weight of everything I had lost pressed down on me like a physical force. The stars began to appear in the sky, distant and cold, their lights so far removed from the warmth of the human experience that it felt almost indifferent. I looked up at them, feeling small and insignificant, as if my place in the vastness of the universe had been stripped of its meaning. The sight of the stars, beautiful and untouchable, only deepened the sense of despair. She was out there somewhere, on a world I could never reach again, and the connection we had was now a distant memory, slowly fading into the past. I realized that this was the true weight of her absence. Not just the loss of her, but the realization that she had been a reflection of something I could never have again. In that fleeting moment of connection, she had reminded me of who I had been, of the person I had left behind when I chose to abandon her, and the life we could have built. I was now left with the memory of what might have been, the dream of a future that would never come to pass. The pain of that loss was both a reminder of my mistakes and a testament to the depth of what I had once shared with her. The emptiness inside me was like an unfillable void, a scar that would never fade. I knew now that I would carry the memory of her with me for the rest of my days. No matter how far I traveled, no matter what I did, she would always be a part of me, and the guilt of having left her behind would always be a shadow that lingered in the background of my life. Yet, in the same breath, I also realized that this was the price of living with choices. Choices that could never be undone, no matter how much I wished for a different outcome. As I stood there, watching the stars above and feeling the absence of the woman who had once meant everything to me, I understood that the universe was vast and indifferent to human suffering. The stars, as beautiful as they were, offered no answers, no comfort. They were simply reminders of how small and fleeting human existence was in the grand expanse of time and space. And yet, despite the despair, there was a strange sense of acceptance in it. I could not change what had happened, but I could learn to live with it. The memory of her, the lessons she had taught me, and the love we had shared would always remain with me, even if she was no longer by my side. In that sense, I wasn't truly alone. Her presence would forever echo in the depths of my soul, a bittersweet reminder of the love I had lost and the truths I had finally confronted.